It is Wyoming Sports Talk today with me, Dino Costa, him, Brett Henderson, and, to get away, Brett, from the, what is it called, Deflategate? To get away from that for just a little bit, I think that the direction that we're going to trend in right now is a little bit more fascinating, compelling, interesting, and controversial than the Deflategate thing. And as I've been talking about at different points during the previous hour, John Ziegler is he's a national talk show host right now. He does a show that is syndicated around the country, The John and Leah Show, which is heard on Sunday nights all over the country. He is also a talk show host previous, many other stations around the country, KFI Radio in Los Angeles. He's a documentary filmmaker and a political and sports pundit par excellence, an opinionated, polarizing individual who never bites his tongue. I consider him a friend as well as a colleague. I've known John for more than 10 years. And as I said, Brett, he's been on my shows many times about many different subjects over the years, but none more compelling, interesting, or polarizing than the Penn State scandal, the Joe Paterno situation, the cover-up that is alleged to have occurred, and the Jerry Sandusky involvement in this whole thing, where John is now convinced beyond a shadow of a doubt. He's not 100% convinced. He's 1,000,000% convinced that Jerry Sandusky has been wrongly accused, charged, convicted, and sitting in a maximum security jail somewhere in Pennsylvania right now. John has had access to Jerry Sandusky in the jail, did the jailhouse interview, has appeared on various television shows nationally geared across the country from time to time, and has a terrific website no matter how you feel about the case. It is framingpaterno.com, framingpaterno.com. Here he is. Once again, I'm pleased and privileged to have him on board. It is John Ziegler. This time, he's on Wyoming Sports Talk today with me, Dino Costa, and Brett Henderson. John, how are you today?
Dino, that was the best introduction I have ever gotten in my career. I'm gonna post this on our website, just the introduction, because I mean that is a career highlight for me. You know, Matt Lauer just simply called me controversial, or I've been called worse by Piers Morgan, but that was tremendous. And thank you for having the courage to take this on in general. And apparently we're going to go at this for 2 hours. This is going to be an epic, really groundbreaking interview. I'm very much looking forward to it.
Well, so are we. And, I'm seated across from a talk show host by the name of Brett Henderson. Brett, say hello.
Hi, John. How are you?
Hey, Brett. Good to talk to you.
You too.
And Brett is just now picked his jaw off the floor, John, after I informed him of who you were and what you've done and what you're about and what you feel. And Brett, because you asked me that question, I'm going to defer to you to get this conversation going. And John's got a lot of ground that we're going to cover here, but you have one question I think that's primary to start this conversation. So why don't you ask John the question, and let's get on with this.
Yeah, John, just to start it off here, the question that I had asked Dino, he said a good way to start with, John, so we'll do it right here, is what led you down this path in the first place to even look into whether or not Jerry Sandusky was an innocent man? Because, by me and obviously most people that you hear from think that it was abundantly clear that he was very guilty. So what even led you down this path in the first place to even look into whether or not there was some shady business going on?
Great question, and it's a fantastic way to start. I'm a documentary filmmaker who specializes in stories where the media blew it. And when this whole thing erupted in November 2011, my focus was on Joe Paterno, because it was very clear to me that there was no way that the modern-day broken news media could possibly have gotten a story this complex, absolutely correct, in 3.5 days, or even less, depending on how you determine it, from the time that it became a national story to the time that Joe Paterno was fired at Penn State after 61 exemplary years. Now, to be clear, I have no allegiance to Penn State. I went to Georgetown University. I did grow up in Pennsylvania, but Penn State was about my third or fourth favorite football team in college growing up. I admired Joe Paterno, had no particular love for him, but it was in my bones that there was no possible way that the story we were being told was true with regard to Paterno. And it was also very clear to me that this story was very uniquely suited to the news media blowing it in a huge way. So I did a documentary film called The Framing of Joe Paterno. The framing is figurative. I wish I would not have done that, but the website's been very well known now for several years as framingpaterno.com. But it's not a conspiracy theory. It's not meant literally. It's figurative. Although there's some truth to the notion of a framing of Joe Paterno, but perhaps we'll get into that later. So that film dealt mostly with why it was absurd that Joe Paterno got the blame that he did, both by Penn State's Board of Trustees and firing him immediately after the story became national, as well as the Free Report, which led to the sanctions against Penn State, which, by the way, have all been revoked. 2 years after they were issued, they were revoked, and the win record is now properly restored, although his statue, for some reason, is not yet back at Penn State. Now, in the process of this, I interviewed Jerry Sandusky in prison, and I did so under the presumption that he was guilty as hell. However, I did have some suspicions that maybe he had been overcharged. A lot of times once these media firestorms start and one side is deemed to be not credible, it's basically Katie bar the door. People will believe anything. So I was open to some of the episodes being inaccurate or exaggerated, but in my mind he was a pedophile. And if you listen to the interview, which you can at framingpaterno.com, because I recorded it on a pen, I snuck a pen into the Pennsylvania State prison system, which is against the rules of the Pennsylvania State prison system. It's the only interview known to ever been recorded in a maximum security prison in the history of Pennsylvania, at least that I'm aware of. And I went on the Today Show after that to do an interview with Matt Lauer about that particular interview. And I was still pretty convinced that he was guilty, although my gut was telling me, wait a minute, this doesn't make any sense. But I didn't go on the Today Show to declare his innocence. I declared Joe Paterno's innocence because I knew that the notion of Sandusky's innocence was, one, so toxic that it would destroy my attempt to exonerate Joe Paterno. Plus, Hall of Famer Franco Harris had made it clear to me that that was a bad idea politically, and I agree with him because I couldn't prove it yet, and I didn't know it to be true. So then I spent a year of my own time against my own self-interest, not getting paid, no hope of this ever benefiting me, trying to basically disprove my gut instinct that this whole thing stunk to high heaven and that it couldn't possibly be true. And the more I got into it, the more I realized my gut was correct. This case is very clear what really happened. I went back a second time into prison to interview Jerry Sandusky and his wife Dottie together. Then Dottie and I went on the Today Show again to do an interview with Matt Lauer from her home for about an hour last year, and I've done extensive investigations of every other aspect of the case, which you can see at framingpaterno.com. So that's, believe it or not, the short version of how I got to where I am on this case.
And what piqued your ears most of what you learned, whether it be with sitting down, doing that interview with Jerry Sandusky? What was the first time you had maybe I do not believe that he is guilty? What was the first thing that really then led you to go to where you got now?
Another great question. I have to say that I was shocked by my experience with him in prison. You have to remember this was a guy who was coming out of solitary confinement at the time. He was on suicide watch, although he should not have been because he was not suicidal. He'd been treated horrendously. Obviously, his whole life had just been shattered beyond comprehension. He's in an orange jumpsuit and handcuffs that are so tight he can't even scratch his cheek because his hands are so close together, and he's got chains around his waist. We can't even, we're separated by a screen. It was very clear to me that if this guy was the evil monster that he would have to be, or the criminal mastermind that he would have to be, that it would be exposed in a 3.5-hour interview with two men, just me and Jerry Sandusky, and I went after him hard for 3.5 hours, and then I interviewed him some more on the phone, and we exchanged dozens and dozens of letters. There's just no, from a global perspective, there's no way. There's absolutely no way that this human being could do what he has been told to do, that we've been told that he did. And by the way, that's not why I believe he's innocent, because I fully believe it's possible for people to be extraordinarily good at fooling people. But we can get into why I think this is important. And what's really important about the mentality of Jerry Sandusky and what he's capable of and what he's not is that I've been on both sides of this fence. I've been on the side of the fence where I was literally trying to get him to confess while in prison. after an FBI alleged expert by the name of Jim Clemente, who's a Paterno family hired gun, who I spoke with on the phone for hours preparing for my interview with Jerry Sandusky, he guaranteed me I would get Sandusky to confess if I did A, B, and C, and D. I did A, B, C, and D. I didn't even come close to getting a confession. Clemente complimented me on how I had done exactly what he wanted me to do, but had no explanation for why there was no confession. And by the way, most of these people confess, especially at this point, when you have no, Jerry Sandusky has no, if he was guilty especially, has no chance of ever seeing the light of day again. There's no reason for him not to confess at this point. And the fact that he hasn't, I think, is incredibly significant. But I've also been on the side of the fence where I was trying to help him, trying to basically organize his team's strategy, trying to fight back by preparing his wife to go on the Today Show with Matt Lauer. I've been in part of numerous decisions by the quote-unquote Sandusky team on how to fight back. And I can tell you guys, he's a moron. He is a complete naive goofball. He's the same guy he was on one side of the fence when I was trying to get him to confess as he was on the side of the fence where I've been trying to get him out of prison. There is no Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. He is not Hannibal Lecter. He's basically, some sort of goofball character, Forrest Gump-like character maybe. He is not the criminal mastermind that could have pulled this off without a massive amount of help, which is clear from the evidence now that he did not have. So that's the big picture as to why I am positive. And it's not even, as Dino said, and it's accurate, it's not that I suspect this. I'm positive of it. It's not. I don't even lose an ounce, 1 second of sleep, worried about whether or not I was wrong on this, because it's so obvious what really happened here.
John, we're going to get to Sandusky. Let's back up, though. Let's start with Paterno, because that's where you started, that's where I started, that's where we started in this whole thing. And I've told my audience, and I've told Brett, that you have moved me a little bit away from feeling as though Paterno was involved, in a massive cover-up. And why don't we start here and get into some of the reasons why you feel that Paterno was, you talk about the broken media model, you talk about the rush to judgment, you talk about execution of a judgment within 3 days, 4 days max after the whole story broke. Talk about all of those things as far as the inconsistencies and the inability of the media, in your mind, really to have a full grasp of the story in a comprehensive fashion, which would then have allowed them to report on the Paterno end of things with much more factual evidence rather than throwing darts at a dartboard.
Wow, these are great questions, guys. This is really awesome. All right, so here's the deal on Paterno, and this is how I started attacking this thing. I mean, was there really a cover-up? Before I even got anywhere close to was Jerry Sandusky guilty, which again I presumed was the case because everyone was saying it, and he got convicted. So I thought, well, all right, that must be at least mostly true. Well, here's the deal with Joe Paterno. We were told on November 5th, 6th, or 7th. Of 2011, that Joe Paterno had been told by assistant coach Mike McQueary that Mike McQueary had witnessed a boy being raped in a Penn State shower, and that Joe Paterno basically did nothing. He passed it up the chain, which, by the way, technically he was supposed to do, didn't follow up on it, and that the poor innocent victim had never been tracked down, and that Sandusky was allowed to remain free to rape and pillage, literally, all these other victims after this alleged incident in 2001, which, by the way, this is really important, Dino. I know you know this, but your listeners probably don't. Back in 2011, we thought that the episode that I just referred to occurred in February of 2002. March of 2002. It actually occurred in February of 2001. So Mike McQueary, this horrific event, this life-changing event, which prosecutors say shattered his universe to his core. He didn't get the month right. He didn't get the date right. He didn't get the year right. He got it all wrong. And there's a reason why he got it all wrong. It's not because his memory is bad. It's because it wasn't nearly as important in 2001 as he pretended it was in 2010 and 11 when he started to testify about this.
All right, let's stop there for a second. Hold on, because, Brett, you believe, I'm sure, that the shower scene, the episode that McQueary said he saw, you're convinced that happened.
Absolutely convinced that happened. What incentive does Mike McQuarrie have to lie about that?
Well, that's another great question. I have an interview, which you can hear at FramingPaterno.com. Find it on YouTube. Just look up my name and ESPN's Don Vanatta. I recorded a phone conversation I had with Don Vanatta as he was researching his profile of Mike McQuarrie, which was run in the ESPN the magazine last year. And in that, Don Vanatta brags, in no uncertain terms, about several things that he has proven, which I had already known to be true, that he was going to report in ESPN the magazine. But several of them never made it into the magazine, I'm certain, because they were edited out because they were far too damaging to Mike McQuarrie's credibility. Number one among those is that when Mike McQuarrie got the phone call from his wife that investigators had come to his house in late 2010, Mike McQuarrie was panicked. Mike McQuarrie was panicked not because they were finally going to talk to him about Jerry Sandusky and this amazing cover-up that he was allegedly part of was going to be shattered. No. Mike McQuarrie, according to people he spoke to immediately by calling them, the people that Don Vanatta had spoken to acknowledge this, Mike McQuarrie thought for sure that the reason why investigators were coming to talk to him was that he had sent pictures of his penis through a Penn State phone to a woman not his wife, and that this was going to end his career because you got to remember he works for Joe Paterno. Joe Paterno is going to fire him instantly the moment any of this gets out. So he was panic-stricken. And so when he eventually talks to investigators, and by the way, it takes 3 weeks from the time that Mike McQuarrie is initially contacted by investigators before he finally tells them anything about having seen Jerry Sandusky in a shower. The reality is that this is a guy who feels exceedingly vulnerable. By the way, he also bet on college football games, which Vanatta did report about. So I'm sure he was concerned about that as well. He gets told by investigators, no, we want to talk to you about Jerry Sandusky and an incident you may have seen back in 2001 or 2002. And we have a kid by the name of Aaron Fisher, who is saying that Jerry has sexually molested him for 3 years. We believe that he's a pedophile. We have a grand jury investigation going on. We really need help. We don't have a witness. We have basically only one victim. Can you help us here? We need to put this monster away. Well, if you're in McQuarrie's situation, and in 2001, you saw something that weirded you out, thought was strange enough where you go to Joe Paterno to explain what you had seen to make sure that he was aware of it, and then 10 years later you're told by investigators, this guy's a pedophile, we need your help in putting him away. I think it's not a far reach at all, that you're going to give them exactly what they want, and that they may be able to easily manipulate your interpretation of events or what you allegedly saw. And by the way, this is really important. McQuarrie never said, even in his first version in the grand jury, never said he saw sex with a boy. He said he thought he might have seen that. And that was 10 years later, after investigators clearly had a huge incentive to manipulate.
Okay, so let's frame this now the right way. We're talking about him being interviewed for something that happened 10 years prior.
Yes.
So at the time, all right. So at the time that the police and the investigators went to McQuarrie, they're questioning him about an event that happened 10 years before.
And not only that, incredibly important point. Not only that, they don't know the date, the month, and the year because McQuarrie ended up giving them the wrong date, month, and the year. But after this event, we now know that McQuarrie played in not one but two Jerry Sandusky-sponsored golf tournaments. He joked around with Sandusky physically at an Easter Seals charity football game in front of hundreds of people. This was well after this alleged event. What I'm submitting to you guys is that what happened here was the reversal of history in retrospect, that it was only 10 years later when investigators come to McQuarrie and convince him that Sandusky is a pedophile and that he may have the key to stopping this monster, that's when he looks back and goes, holy hell. What I was weirded out by 10 years ago, I didn't even think it was that big of a deal because I can't remember the date, the month, and the year, was way worse than I thought. And so he's trying to do the right thing, McQuarrie is. Plus, he's scared out of his mind that he's going to get somehow implicated in some other way here. By the way, they can also claim that he didn't report it to police. So they've got that hanging over his head, too.
All right, John, I think it's important to mention he saw something happen, something he thought he saw in the shower. He left the building. He said that Sandusky and the boy saw him. He goes home. Yeah. He calls his dad.
Okay, but let's be clear. He actually says he heard. Most of his testimony is about what he heard.
Okay, he never said in his testimony that he saw?
His testimony is he heard sounds he associated with sex.
On the witness stand during the Sandusky trial, he said that.
Heard.
Anybody can find that if they look. That is verbatim. He never said, I saw.
No, in fact, he said the opposite. He said, I never saw sex. Those are almost a direct quote from McQuarrie. He's heard sounds associated with sex. He turns the corner. He looks, by the way, this is how absurd this is. He looks through a mirror in a steamy shower, and through the mirror, he's able to just get a glimpse of Sandusky and the boy in the shower. And by his own admission, it's for 2 or 3 seconds. That's a direct quote, too. 2 or 3 seconds, McQuarrie says he sees something that he's not sure what it was, but it bothered him. And so at that point, he calls his father. By the way, in my view, just to be clear, McQuarrie lies when he says he made eye contact with Jerry and the boy, because neither Jerry nor the boy, which we'll get to momentarily, I'm sure, say that they made eye contact with McQuarrie, because they didn't. This is really important. Neither Jerry nor the boy knew Mike McQuarrie was there that night. McQuarrie looked at this event from afar. He never even bothered. Forget about beating the crap out of Sandusky, which any human being would have done, especially when you're a 20-something strapping former 6'4" quarterback, and it's an old naked guy. So if he had really seen what he says he claimed, or what the prosecution claimed, he would have beat the crap out of Sandusky.
I don't think that's fair, because you don't know for certain what you would do in an instance like. I would like to think that that's exactly what I would do, but I don't think that's fair to jump to that conclusion that that's what he would have done.
Okay, but you don't. Okay, you leave the boy there. You leave the boy there. Seriously? What? I mean, that's insane. That's absurd.
The little boy's being raped.
Yeah, there's no way. There is no possible way. I think he was 7 years old, 6'4", strapping full of muscle.
Okay, but now hold on a second. Let's get to the boy here in a second. Now, in the immediate aftermath of the incident that he thought he saw, he heard, whatever, what does McQuarrie do?
He goes and he calls his dad. And he calls it, and this is an important part of my theory, and by the way, Jay Paterno's theory about what happened here, although Jay Paterno doesn't have the balls to say this publicly because he wants to potentially work in broadcasting or maybe get a coaching job someday again, so he's afraid to say this. But Mike McQuarrie's dad is a key figure here. At this point, Mike McQuarrie's dad brings in a doctor friend, a guy who actually he works for, a guy by the name of Dr. Dranoff. The three of them get together and discuss this. Dr. Dranoff, who had every reason to believe that he was a mandated reporter for child sex abuse at the time, speaks to McQuarrie in depth about what he thinks he saw. He asks him 3 times, "Did you see a sex act?" McQuarrie says no, according to Dranoff's testimony. He says that 3 times. He never said one thing about witnessing a sex act. At that point, Dranoff and his dad, and apparently his dad was the major motivator here, urge him to go see Joe Paterno the next day. Now, why is this important? This is important. This is what I was referring to about Jay Paterno's theory, which I thought was crazy at first, because when Jay told me this, I presumed that Sandusky was guilty. But this actually makes a lot of sense now. What really happened is this. 2 days before this episode, and again, we didn't know this back when the firestorm happened because McQuarrie got the date, the month, and the year wrong. So we now know happened on February 9th of 2001. Well, on February 6th or 7th of that particular year, Kenny Jackson leaves the wide receiving coaching job at Penn State to go to the Pittsburgh Steelers. That's the job that Mike McQuarrie would end up getting 3.5 years later. It is Jay Paterno's view and my view that Mike McQuarrie's dad, knowing full well that the Kenny Jackson job is open, McQueary is a lowly graduate assistant at that time, sees this as a golden opportunity to get fantastic FaceTime with Joe Paterno with a job open and show Joe Paterno what a great Boy Scout Mike McQueary is by showing him he's willing to come forward and tell something that he might not want to hear about a guy who, by the way, is retired and Joe Paterno never liked. Now, that to me makes a hell of a lot more sense as to why you would go to Joe Paterno as opposed to the police. If you had seen a crime, you go to the police. You don't go to Joe Paterno unless this is more than about an alleged crime. And it's interesting that McQueary claims, and Sue Paterno says to me, quote, that never happened. McQueary claims that when he calls Paterno the next morning to ask if he can come over, Paterno says to him, if this is about a job, don't bother coming over. I don't have one for you. Again, Sue Paterno was there that night or that day, says that didn't happen. That, to me, is a classic example of McQueary projecting into his memory of the testimony something that was in his brain but never actually happened.
Now,
because it was in McQueary's brain that he was going over there for a job and not because he had seen a crime.
Now, 10 years have gone by before McQueary is then interviewed by the investigators as the Sandusky thing explodes across the country. He's giving testimony to them with a 10-year gap in between. Who was the boy in the shower? Has he been identified? Has he been interviewed? And if he has, what has he said about what happened in the shower?
Yes, we know who the boy in the shower is. This was further confirmed last week, although I have already known it for years, with some new information in Jerry Sandusky's last appeal, his post-conviction relief petition, which people can find at framingpaterno.com. His name is Alan Myers. Alan Myers is an extraordinary story and incredibly important in all.
Alan Myers is his name.
Yes, Alan Myers. He was 1 month short of his 14th birthday on February 9th of 2001. And I am positive that he was the boy in the shower that night. I figured this out on my own, by the way. Jerry Sandusky tried for me not to figure this out. But I was able to figure it out using, basically some circumstantial evidence, and then I ended up getting it verified through Jerry and through his attorney and through his Dottie Sandusky. The long story short of Alan Myers is this. After this event that McQueary claims to have witnessed, the following things happen. Alan Myers has Jerry Sandusky as his father, standing in as his father in a senior football game.
Time out. Let's just for clarification purposes now. This is the kid in the shower.
Yes.
A month shy of his 14th birthday when an alleged rape took place that Mike McQueary thought, saw, heard, whatever. 10 years in a gap between when it happened and when McQueary was interviewed by the investigators. You mean to tell me that this kid, Alan Myers, the kid in the shower with Sandusky,
right,
fatherless, had Jerry Sandusky serving as his father of sorts at a what?
His senior football game.
4 years. 4 years later.
Actually, less than that. It was 2.5 years later after the event. Alan Myers, a month short of his 14th birthday in the shower, and this is, to me, the right way to look at this, he's 2 years short of winning a varsity letter on his high school football team.
Wait, so the guy who was allegedly molesting Alan Myers in the shower is now using Jerry Sandusky a few short years later as, for all intents and purposes, his surrogate father?
Yeah, exactly. It gets way better. So his seniors football game, Jerry Sandusky stands in. By the way, I've spoken to witnesses who verify this. Alan Myers has written about this publicly. This is not in question. Then the next thing that happens the following spring after that senior football game, Alan Myers invites Jerry Sandusky to be the speaker at his high school graduation, which Jerry does in fact accept. So he has Jerry speak at the West Branch High School graduation for his senior year. So then it gets even better than that. Alan Myers ends up spending some time going to Penn State, taking some classes there. Guess who he lives with during that time period? He lives for 3 months with Jerry and Sandusky.
No, John, come on.
Yes,
John.
It gets even better. It gets even better. So then Jerry Sandusky's mother, Alan ends up going into the Marines, which, it's hardly an indication that he's a meek kind of guy that is going to take somebody who sexually abused him and allow him to run roughshod over him and do all the things we're discussing here. So he's in the Marines, and while he's in the Marine Corps, while he's stationed in North Carolina, Jerry's mother, not his wife, not his daughter, his mother dies. That's a 10.5-hour drive from North Carolina to Jerry's mother's funeral. Alan Myers drives it both directions to go to the funeral. Then Alan Myers gets married. And who does he invite to the wedding? Jerry and Dottie Sandusky, all, which, by the way, they attended, and the photo of Alan Myers in his military Marine uniform and Jerry Sandusky is the photo that gets used in the Internet version of Jerry Sandusky's retirement letter from the Second Mile charity. You can still see that if you search it properly on the Internet.
Okay, time out. Brett, your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, could you make the argument that this is a certain case to a certain extent of Stockholm Syndrome, where people, all of a sudden have respect for their captors and people who are taking advantage of them? I mean, I'm not hearing a smoking gun. I'm hearing a lot of theories here. And, I mean, there's often times where victims will, respect the people that are abusing them. That happens very often.
I think, there's two things. One, we're not done with the story yet. Two, I think that you are being incredibly naive if you think that the events that we're referring to are within the realm of what's called compliant victimization. This is not a situation of Alan Myers simply putting up with Jerry Sandusky. He is going out of his way to honor him, to have him be at his wedding, to attend the funeral of his mother. And then once the allegations come out, that's when Alan's support really gets dramatic, because when the newspaper article gets published in the local paper in late March of 2011, and there's the leaking of the grand jury investigation of Jerry Sandusky, a couple of supporters of Jerry end up writing letters to the editor in local newspapers talking about their experience with Jerry. One of them is Alan Myers. Alan Myers writes at least that we know of, two letters to the editor published in local newspapers. He writes the same letter to the Attorney General of the state of Pennsylvania, who at the time was overseeing the grand jury investigation, where he goes into great detail about how Jerry Sandusky is the greatest thing that's ever happened to him, goes through some of the things that you and I have just discussed about the events of his life, and puts his name and address on the letter. Then, in September of that year, by the way, in August of that year, he and Jerry Sandusky play golf together very publicly, along with a guy who happens to be a member of the Board of Trustees at Penn State now, and the guy who was the founder and funder of the Second Mile charity, which is an awfully weird thing for that person to do. His name is Bruce Heim, if in fact he believes that Jerry's a pedophile, because at this point it's now public that there's a grand jury investigation, and if there's some sort of a cover-up, he knows that it's all going to shatter and that it's all going to come back on him. And here he is hosting Jerry and Alan Myers playing golf together at the most high-profile golf resort in State College. So then, in September of that year, Alan Myers is asked to do an interview with police who are investigating Jerry Sandusky. They're still desperate for witnesses or victims. And in that interview, Alan Myers makes it very clear that Jerry Sandusky never did anything to him sexually. And in fact, he ends up walking out of the interview because he says, quote, "I feel like you're trying to get me to lie about Jerry Sandusky, and I will never," this is a quote, "I will never say anything bad about Jerry Sandusky." And he walks out of the police interview. Then when Jerry gets arrested, Alan Myers walks unannounced into Joe Amendola, Jerry Sandusky's defense attorney's office, on November 8th of 2011, right, and says, "I'm the boy who was in the shower in the McQuarrie episode. I don't understand what the hell McQuarrie's talking about. Can I give you a statement?" By the way, he comes in with his mother. He comes in with his mother. All right? Then, but guess what? This is how crazy incompetent and overwhelmed in the circumstances Jerry's defense team is, they tell him to come back tomorrow because they don't have anyone to take his statement.
Will you confirm for me, the kid that we're talking about, this Alan Myers? Okay, and I got a question for Brett here in just a second, but the kid you're talking about, Alan Myers, this is victim number 2. Am I correct?
Correct.
Okay,
yeah.
Victim number 2. Now, I access just online right now a story by Colleen Curry via 2020. This is going back to July 26th, 2012.
Uh-huh.
The man who was seen being sexually assaulted in the Penn State showers by Jerry Sandusky in 2001 has come forward and identified himself to attorneys who say that he plans to sue the university.
Correct.
Okay.
Right. Well, I'll get to that. In fact, I don't know if you remember this, Dino, but that day when he came forward as the news story, you actually emailed me the news story and said, I think you said something like, "Uh-oh, your theory could be wrong." And I responded to you saying, "Actually, this proves my theory," which I'll get to in a second. So let's go through the timeline here. So Alan Myers comes back that next day on November 9th, the day Joe Paterno was fired, just miles from where Paterno will be announced to have been fired. He gives a complete and comprehensive statement about what happened that night in the shower, as well as his entire experience with Jerry Sandusky. You can find that statement on our website, framingpaterno.com. He says things in there that only the boy in the shower could possibly know, specifically the sound of the locker slamming, which Mike McQueary testified to, but yet that had not yet become public at that point. So not to mention, he completely nails exactly the interaction between Jerry Sandusky and Penn State in the intervening weeks after the episode, where Penn State questions Jerry Sandusky about it because of Mike McQueary's report, and Jerry says to Alan, "Hey, Alan, Penn State might want to talk to you about what happened with us the other, however long ago it was, in the shower. Apparently someone saw us. By the way, neither of them knew it was McQueary. Would you be willing to talk to Penn State?" He tells Jerry, "Sure, I'll talk to Penn State." For some reason, Penn State never bothers to talk to Alan Myers. It's my view because they were sure that nothing had happened because McQueary hadn't told them that anything horrible had happened, and they believed Jerry. So they didn't want to bother the kid. So anyway, going forward, Alan Myers never thinks about this again until November of 2011. He gives this statement, and Joe Amendola and his investigators think, "Eureka! We've got the case nailed. McQueary is toast. His credibility is done. We've got the kid," and he says unequivocally, nothing happened. Well, then Joe Paterno gets fired. And the night Joe Paterno gets fired is essentially an earthquake in the entire state of Pennsylvania. The next morning, Business Insider has a headline: Penn State on the basically liable for $100 million in victim damages. That's on November 10th of 2011, the morning after Paterno was fired. Everything changes at that point. The whole world is different, and it just so happens that the number one attorney, who was literally advertising for Jerry Sandusky accusers, a guy by the name of Andrew Shubin. I mean, this is I'm not exaggerating. Literally advertising on his website for Sandusky accusers after Paterno's firing. Just so happens that Andrew Shubin had been Alan Myers' attorney in not one but 2 DUIs well before this ever occurred, and that Alan Myers' mother had worked for Andrew Shubin in his law firm. What is very clear happened is that Andrew Shubin realizes that his former client, Alan Myers, has had some sort of contact with Jerry Sandusky. He suddenly then, I'm sure after questioning him, I'm sure Alan tells him, "Yeah, I was the guy that was in the shower with Mike McQueary." Andrew Shubin sees millions and millions of dollar signs, and at that point convinces Alan Myers, who is no longer in the Marines, who is unemployed and married, with 2 DUIs on his record, that he can get him millions of dollars if he just shuts the hell up He convinces him he never has to testify and therefore won't be the reason why his friend Jerry Sandusky will be put in prison. That's exactly what happens. Alan Myers does not testify at trial. The defense is afraid to call him because Amendola is told by Shubin that Alan Myers is now a victim, which shocks the hell out of him. The prosecution doesn't call him because they know about the prior statements that he's made, and I think that they were also so suspicious that that was the truth.
Okay, so we're talking about a kid who obviously has had a significant change of direction and a constitution and a character that is not exactly what you would lead it to believe from years earlier. You're saying that he went for the... By the way, did Alan Myers receive any money?
He received $3 million. Andrew Shubin got $700,000 of that. By the way, I know that exclusive.
So he now, this guy that he considered to be a surrogate dad who's rotting away in a maximum security penitentiary, he's sitting in there, and Alan Myers received $3 million, and which I would find unconscionable if it was myself. But apparently this kid has been able to overlook everything, and despite the fact that you feel that Myers feels that nothing ever happened, and he stated on the record that nothing ever happened, he's allowing Jerry Sandusky to rot in jail while his pockets have been lined with $3 million.
And I think it's tearing him up, but I also think that this is a unique case which allows him to rationalize things, Dino, because as you well know, the whole world knows, quote-unquote, knows that Jerry Sandusky is a pedophile. And so therefore, Alan may believe that, I mean, after all, the guy who got him $3 million, Andrew Shubin, has represented 9 accusers in this case. I'm sure Shubin has convinced him that Jerry is, in fact, a pedophile, and that therefore, don't worry, you got no blood on your hands. Don't worry about it. He was nice to you. You might not have even realized that he was grooming you to sexually abuse you, or maybe you just dodged the bullet, whatever it was. And the reality is that Alan Myers probably, I don't know what the percentages are, but I think it's more than plausible that Alan Myers has rationalized that it doesn't matter that he didn't come forward to tell the truth in court because Jerry's guilty, and that therefore he's not the reason why Jerry is in prison. I am of the belief, and I believe this strongly, that if I had all the accusers of Jerry Sandusky in a room together, and I was able to convince them, which I think I could, that the first accuser, a guy by the name of Aaron Fisher, was not telling the truth, that instantaneously all of them would either be in tears over the realization of what they had been part of, or they would run out of the room terrified they were going to jail and they were going to lose their settlements from Penn State. Because that's what happened here. Once the media convicts Jerry Sandusky, all of these potential accusers all think, well, what's the big deal? I might as well get my piece of the pie. My life sucks. I got no dad. My wife's my wife's haggling me because I got no money. My mom was an alcoholic or a drug user. My life sucked. That's why I was in this.
Okay, right. Pot of gold at the end of the rainbow here coming up if I just simply play the game. Now, just to let people know, it is John Ziegler is on Wyoming Sports Talk today. He's got a website, framingpaterno.com. He is convinced that Jerry Sandusky is innocent and Joe Paterno had nothing to do with the cover-up, and we're doing the next 2 hours here with John with limited commercial interruption. Brett, to you, I ask you, why are you quick to simply assume that Alan Myers could simply be blocking the molestations at the hands of Jerry Sandusky and believing instead that Sandusky is the monster that he's been painted as?
Well, because I think he was anally raped in the shower. That's what I think.
So what? Mike McQuarrie never even said that. And by the way, the jury declared him not guilty on that count. So why are you believing that? McQuarrie never said it. The jury said it didn't happen. Myers says it didn't happen. Jerry Sandusky said it didn't happen. And Mike McQuarrie's actions from that moment until 10 years later are perfectly consistent with nothing ever happened. Why are you believing? That's like a religious belief or a belief in aliens.
Well, I mean, he did tell on trial that he spoke with Joe Paterno and said, quote, I told him, and I want to make sure I'm clear, I made sure he knew it was sexual and it was wrong. Right. There was no doubt. He said that on the stand, right. Correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
However, he has a huge, at that point, he has a huge incentive to say that. And also, more importantly, none of his actions for 10 years are consistent with that. And it's important to point out, Mike McQuarrie is suing Penn State currently in a case that's still ongoing. He's not alleging that he was forced to be part of a cover-up. he would have to have been part of a cover-up, because you can't have a cover-up without the only witness. And if he alleged, by the way, the news media would sing hosannas towards Mike McQueary if he alleged that Joe Paterno or someone at Penn State forced him to be part of a cover-up, and it would be worth millions of dollars. Instead, he's got this bullcrap whistleblower lawsuit that doesn't even fit the facts of the case, that the media is like, we don't care, because there's nothing good in it for them in that. So it makes he's against his own self-interest in not claiming to be part of a cover-up, because he wasn't part of a cover-up. Here's what happened with Joe Paterno's testimony, okay? It's very clear. Joe Paterno, when he claimed in one sentence, it's not even a full sentence, it's a phrase in one sentence of a grand jury testimony, which, by the way, we don't even have a recording of. This is maybe the most amazing part of the entire case. Joe Paterno's entire 61-year career gets destroyed in one phrase of one sentence in a grand jury testimony we don't even have a recording of, which is in contradiction to not one but two interviews he did in the weeks leading up to that grand jury testimony, where he never mentions the word sex. He references horsing around, and it is very obvious, and I am now, I don't know exactly how it happened, but it is most likely that the Office of the Attorney General planted the word sexual in Joe Paterno's brain after he had given an interview to police just before his grand jury testimony. And I believe what happened was that the Office of the Attorney General told Joe Paterno that Mike said it was sexual, and Joe Paterno was hoisted on the petard of his own loyalty to his own people and thought, well, gee, Mike couldn't have got this wrong. I must not be remembering it right. I'm 84 years old. People want me out of here because I'm old and slow, and maybe my memory's not what it used to be. I can't believe I don't remember that, because I thought I would remember that from 10 years earlier, but I'm going to back up my guy, Mike McQueary, and I'm going to say exactly what he did. And that's what ended Joe Paterno's career. He was trying to be loyal to Mike McQueary. He was trying not to obstruct a prosecution investigation. Remember, he's a Republican. He thinks the prosecution is always right. He doesn't want to obstruct. His son, Scott Paterno, is a Republican lobbyist. Scott is his lawyer on this case. Scott has a huge incentive to make sure that Joe backs up Mike McQueary on this, and that this investigation is not obstructed by Joe Paterno. And if Joe Paterno says, it just says the following, I don't remember what Mike McQueary told me 10 or 11 years ago, because I don't even remember what the date of the year was, which would have been an honest answer. If that's what Joe Paterno says, Jerry Sandusky, and I believe this with all my heart, is playing golf today.
Well, I want to focus on Jerry Sandusky and not Joe Paterno. I want to get an important question.
Wait a minute. The reason why people believe Mike McQueary is because Joe Paterno backed him up. You can't. So I'm giving you an explanation that makes a hell of a lot more sense than the alternative explanation. The alternative explanation is somehow Joe Paterno was a complete fraud and didn't care about a boy being raped in a shower, which is ridiculous.
But John, because he's new to this, I'm talking about Brett. It had no background on you prior to this. He's got some questions, understandably.
Sure.
This is a fresh cut still for him. He's still, to figuring things out in his mind.
Absolutely.
So let him throw some questions at you. Go ahead, Brett.
Sure, please.
John, was Jerry Sandusky naked with Alan in that shower?
Yes.
He was naked with a young boy in a shower.
Correct.
Okay.
13, 14-year-old boy who, by the way, he perceived him to be a son. This is another part of the context you have to understand here. Jerry has no natural-born children. He'd had dozens of foster children, 6 adopted children. Alan was closer to him than a couple of his own adopted children, and vice versa. So in his mind, two things. Alan is not a kid. Alan is a high school football player. Number 2, Alan's his son. And number 3, Jerry grew up in a rec home where everybody was naked all the time, swimming naked, showering naked. That was what his experience was. He was from a different generation. So I'm not justifying it. It's stupid, among many things. It's stupid. And Jerry is a dumb guy in a lot of ways. So I have no problem with people going, what the hell is that? But the context here is exceedingly important. Alan was not an 8-year-old boy. He was post-puberty. He was a football player, and he was thought of Jerry as being in a father-son relationship. And I do think that puts a much different spin on things.
Okay, we're focusing on a lot of just victim number 2 who was in the shower. There were 10 victims that did come forward. Did any of these 10...
That's not true.
Okay, how many came forward then?
There were 10 quote-unquote victims at trial.
Okay.
There were 8 who testified.
Okay.
8 who testified, 2 were fictitious. One was the janitor episode, which we learned an awful lot about this past week and what a fraud that was. And the other quote-unquote unknown victim was Alan Myers, because the prosecution didn't want to have him testify because they were afraid of what he would say. Of those 8 who did testify, it's important to point out that only 4 allege actual sex acts, and only 2 of those 4 did so before Joe Paterno was fired. And I think that is a key demarcation point in this whole case, because after Joe Paterno was fired, every trial lawyer in the state of Pennsylvania knows for certain Fort Knox is wide open and the key is on the table.
Now, did any of these victims know one another? They didn't have...
great question.
Yeah.
You know, it's interesting that Sarah Ganim, this is going to blow your mind, Dino, because I know you hate the media as much as I do. This is one of the top 10 most amazing facts of this case. So Sarah Ganim won a Pulitzer Prize. She's now at CNN, last seen doing snow coverage because she's not really a journalist. Sarah Ganim won the Pulitzer Prize for having broken this story. Sarah Ganim was 24 years old and had been on the job at a small newspaper in Pennsylvania for 3 months when she breaks the story of this grand jury investigation. All right. Well, during the course of her investigation, we now know, because the prosecution had to stipulate to this at trial, that she had contacted the mother of so-called victim number 6. This was the alleged victim of the 1998 episode, which the district attorney looked into and decided not to press charges against Jerry Sandusky. And frankly, if you look at the testimony of victim number 6 at trial, it sounds like it's testimony for the defense. Literally nothing happened in that particular episode, which is why he was properly not charged. Okay, so back to Sarah Ganim. Ganim contacts the mother of this particular victim number 6 and informs her that unless she finds new accusers, that the case against Sandusky is going to be closed. And oh, by the way, here's the name and number of an investigating agent should you be able to find new accusers. Well, guess what happens? We have a photograph from Jerry Sandusky's book, an infamous photograph. The prosecutors hilariously claim that Jerry put the photograph in his book as somehow a form of confession, because there are four accusers in that particular photograph. And guess who's right there in the middle of the photograph? It's victim number 6, along with victim number 3, victim number 4, victim number 5. Actually, no, it's 4, 5, 6, and 7 are all in the photograph together. Let me back up.
Okay.
4, 5, 6, and 7 are all in the photograph together. And isn't it amazing? Isn't it an amazing coincidence that Sarah Ganim contacts the mother of one of the boys in that photograph, tells them that the investigation is going to get closed unless we find new accusers, and lo and behold, we find 3 of the 8 accusers in the same photograph with the son of that particular mother. Isn't that remarkable?
All right, John, we got to take a quick time out. It's John Ziegler. He's on the show, Wyoming Sports Talk today. Limited commercial interruption as we're talking about the Sandusky, Paterno, Penn State thing and his website, framingpaterno.com. We pick it up hour number 2 at the top. We go to the break here and then pick it up with John in hour number 2. You're listening to Wyoming Sports Talk today with Dino Costa and with Brett Henderson. We're back with more right after this. Right now, John Ziegler is our special guest. He joined us in the second hour, going to be with us throughout the third hour right here. He is a defender of both Joe Paterno, Jerry Sandusky, and has got a terrific website, framingpaterno.com. We're going through the whole situation as much as we can, thoroughly as possible in the time we've got John on the show with us here today. If you've got questions, text us at
307-286-2380, 286-2380.
John, why and how did the media rush to judgment? Let's try to get more dialogue back and forth instead of a lot of longer answers here in the second hour. Why and how did the media rush to judgment on both the Paterno situation and the Sandusky situation?
Well, because the news media always wants the story today. They don't need to worry about waiting until the facts come out. Look what happened with Hands Up, Don't Shoot. This was Hands Up, Don't Shoot. Only the equivalent in this case was McQueary saw a rape, and no one did anything about it. So just replace Hands Up, Don't Shoot with McQueary saw a rape and nobody did anything about it, and you have the same basic concept. Well, this was all based upon a 23-page grand jury presentment, which we now know was based in balderdash and was written in an extremely biased fashion. And frankly, the reason why it was written in an extremely biased fashion is, ironically enough, the case against Sandusky was so incredibly weak that I think the prosecution felt like they needed to pour enormous gasoline on the fire. And it's my view, and I can't prove this, but I actually think, Dino, they were shocked that the whole thing blew up the way that it did. I don't think they ever intended this to blow back on Joe Paterno. As a matter of fact, on the very first day of the story, in an article written by the Pulitzer Prize-winning Sarah Ganim, who was clearly the prosecution's go-to reporter, there was an attorney general source praising Joe Paterno for his actions in this case. That was 4 days before he got fired. So this, I think, went in a way that no one anticipated, and it was really because the news media decided to take as gospel truth something for which there was no evidence, no cross-examination. We didn't even know exactly what was said in the grand jury. I mean, the news media pretended as if we had had a trial, and that there was actual evidence proving these things. This was simply an allegation. We weren't even supposed to have seen the indictment at that point. I mean, these were improperly and probably illegally leaked documents that were false. And so ESPN is a bunch of morons, and the story was too good to resist. And once it turned towards Joe Paterno, it was a slow sports week. You got to remember the NBA was on strike, and college basketball hadn't started. Football was in a lull. No one cared about hockey at that point. I mean, there was nothing going on. And this is, of course, the greatest Greek tragedy story of all time, the bringing down of Joe Paterno. And of course, part of the perfect storm was that Penn State had a home football game that weekend, which was going to be Joe Paterno's last game, that ESPN was broadcasting. So if you take away that pressure point, I don't think any of this happens. In fact, I think if Penn State's on the road that week, I don't think any of this happened.
Now, while you say the media did jump to, a rush to judgments, I will agree with you on that and put him on trial prior to him going on trial. He eventually did go on trial, was charged with 52 counts of sexual crimes against children, and was found guilty for the overwhelming majority of those. What do you make of the trial itself?
Well, once you have Joe Paterno, see, this is all connected. Once Joe Paterno is fired, and immediately after Joe Paterno is fired, you have a massive candlelight vigil for the victims on campus. You have a prayer for the victims just before the next football game. You have the entire community of State College and Penn State University with a huge incentive to throw Jerry Sandusky under the bus. One, to placate the media, and two, because now he's not just a pedophile, because he must be guilty, because Penn State would never have been stupid enough to fire a legend unless he was guilty, right? Well, they were. But not only is he a pedophile, he's the pedophile that brought down the great Joe Paterno. So all of the people who would have been naturally supporting Jerry Sandusky and say, hey, wait a minute, now they have no political cover. They might hate him personally. They believe he has to be guilty because they have faith in Penn State as an institution, that they wouldn't be so colossally imbecilic as to fire everybody, including the president of the university, Graham Spanier, who's a tremendous guy and who got railroaded as much as anybody in this whole thing. There was logical for everybody in the community to believe Jerry has to be guilty, and that their community was going to be judged on whether or not they convicted this guy. If you look at the videotapes from outside of that trial, and I think, Dino, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think even you would be highly uncomfortable with the Salem witch trial aspect of having hundreds of people, almost with pitchforks in hand, cheering verdicts that were come to 7 months after arrest. The people who were charged with the alleged cover-up, the Penn State administrators, still have never seen an actual trial 3.5 years later, and they're nowhere near close to seeing an actual
John,
trial.
here's what I will say, and I've I do my due diligence as much as you do. We've been through this time and time again. I've done my own independent looking at this, and I spoke with many people in Happy Valley, around the Penn State community, and one of the things that I was going to assume was that if Jerry Sandusky was a well-known pedophile for a number of different years, that whisperings in that small community would have gotten around here and there, and people would have heard, or rumors or speculation, or hey, did you hear maybe Jerry's a little...
Right.
Do you know I've spoken with 5-6 people who live in Happy Valley, live there, go to diners, restaurants, other kinds of restaurants, other kinds of social activities, to a man and woman, and they've been there many years, decades, some of them. Not one said to me, Dino, I got to admit to you, I never heard anything about Jerry Sandusky. Not a thing.
And that's a really important point, especially in retrospect now that we're 3.5 years later, because this is the most unprecedented involved investigation in the history of this subject matter. And that's not an hyperbole. There's been numerous formal investigations, informal investigations, enormous media coverage. Guys, let's use our brains for a minute. If Jerry Sandusky was truly guilty, there would be evidence everywhere. There would be figurative blood on the walls. There would be O.J. Simpson-like evidence, because there's no possible way, once this level of scrutiny is involved, people would be coming out of the woodwork. There would be all sorts of factual, hard evidence instead of simply testimony from people who got paid millions of dollars for that testimony. And there's none. There's no evidence where there should be mountains of evidence. Let me give you an example. I'm the only one that's made this point, to my knowledge, but every single accuser that we're aware of, and certainly every single one of the trial accusers, all 8 who testified, of those, every single one came from the Second Mile charity. Yet people forget that Jerry ran a massive football camp, which was held for a week at a time, numerous weeks during his post-Penn State retirement, at remote locations where he was completely and totally in charge of everything, and he was seen as a god in that particular setting because it's his football camp. Not one allegation ever from the football camp. Now, come on, folks. Use your brains. There's a reason. There's a reason why the Second Mile kids, who all came from broken homes, were willing to sell out for the money.
There's also a reason that the victims came from Second Mile as well, because they were more vulnerable than those that were at a football camp and probably came from good families as well.
I see. So the brilliant mastermind. So then explain to me this. So how is it that the savant, Jerry Sandusky, he's
not a savant. You said himself he's an idiot.
No. Wait a minute. I'm using your theory. What you're suggesting is that Jerry is so good at being able to choose the most vulnerable victims, the ones that will not say anything. How is it that he suddenly, at the age of 64, for the first time in his entire life, has a person coming forward to claim that Sandusky sexually abused him, a kid by the name of Aaron Fisher? How is it that at 64, Jerry suddenly loses the magic touch of being able to, in a savant-like manner, choose the most vulnerable victims who will keep their mouths shut? How does that happen? And how is it logical that at 64, think about that. By the way, the guy happens to have low testosterone, medical low testosterone. So at 64 and with low testosterone, this sex addict who only, by the way, not one allegation of ever being involved in a homosexual relationship. He's married to a woman who says that they have a perfectly normal sexual relationship, and yet he only has sex with 12, 13, 14-year-old boys. At 64... suddenly loses the touch of being able.
And how many years did he coach at Penn State on Paterno's staff?
30 years.
And not one allegation there.
Well, there was the 1998 allegation, which was investigated by the district attorney, which, by the way, was not sexual.
No. I mean, not one allegation in regard to anyone on the football team.
That's correct, yeah.
Okay, that's what I'm saying. He did his whole coaching career. He never had a problem where a player came forward and said that Jerry Sandusky was looking at me, or
No,
exactly.
Absolutely not.
Okay,
No.
so now, but here's, by the way, before we get to the Costas interview, which I had a huge problem with, which
Sure.
Brett has a problem with, which a lot of people have a problem with. We want to hear what you have to say about that. I have a question. Who is the first accuser? Why did he lie? Who is he? Where is he now?
Okay, Aaron Fisher is the key to this whole case. Aaron Fisher's the only accuser of the trial victims or accusers who his name is widely known, although technically they're all known because they're all in public records. But Aaron Fisher has made his name known because he's the only one who wrote a book about this. By the way, I urge anyone who cares about this case, if they were going to read one publication, I would ask you to read Aaron Fisher's book. Aaron Fisher's book is written by himself and allegedly, and his therapist, along with his mother. If you read that book with a remotely open mind and half a brain cell, you will go, "What the hell is this?" And frankly, that was the final nail in the coffin for me. When I read his book, I was.
Why, John? Why?
Because there are no details where there should be. There are allegations that I know to be complete, not just false, totally balderdash. There are theories put forward by his therapist. His therapist believes in more conspiracies than you do, Dino. I mean, this guy is a nut job. He thinks the Philadelphia Eagles were somehow in on this. Jerry Sandusky had no relationship with the Philadelphia Eagles.
Oh, you're serious about that?
I'm totally
okay.
serious. It's hilarious.
Okay.
I swear to you, the book is a riot. The book is a laugh-out-loud riot if you know the facts of the case.
All right, John,
Anyway,
go ahead. I'm go finish this up quick. Go ahead.
all right, so Aaron Fisher is the first one to come forward with an allegation that Jerry Sandusky sexually abused him. Here's why we know Aaron Fisher is lying. Well, first of all, his first story to the police, his first story, which, by the way, I've spoken to them, his first story to the principal of his school, his first story to the caseworker from Children's Youth Services was nothing sexual. That's his first story to every single one of them, and these were in different situations.
And these are on the record.
Absolutely.
All right.
He changed his story at least 3 or 4 times.
So why do you believe that version of it?
Hold on. Would you let me? I'll be happy to answer whatever you want, but let me just tell you
Sure.
the Aaron Fisher story. So he's changed his timeline at least 3 or 4 different times, and his story now is that at the ages of 12, 13, and 14, which was totally different than any other version of the story he told, after he could not tell his story in the grand jury, he failed the first time to tell it in the grand jury, he failed the second time in the grand jury, the third time he had to read his statement, read it, I'm sure it wasn't written by him, he had to read his statement with his therapist there with him in the grand jury. He had to read his statement about Jerry Sandusky having molested him. At trial, all of a sudden, Jerry had molested him, forced him into oral sex at least 100 times from the ages of 12 through 14. Now, that doesn't make a lot of sense, but okay, fine. That's your allegation. You finally come to it after numerous different versions of your story. Without one shred of evidence, by the way. 100. I would like to, not to get gross, guys, but if you had an affair with a woman which involved oral sex 100 times and you were married, what are the chances that your wife, or in this case Aaron Fisher's mother, would find zero evidence of that in 3 years? There's no chance of that. There is absolutely no chance of that whatsoever.
What are you basing that on? I mean, you can't just throw that out as a blanket statement.
No. This is under the guise. This is under the heading of there should be evidence where there's none. None. By the way, and I'm not even talking about just no DNA evidence, which there isn't. There's not a phone call. I have physically a cell phone video that Aaron Fisher used or made while using Jerry Sandusky's phone, where he is pretending. The guy's a storyteller. He's an attention whore. He's a liar. He takes Jerry Sandusky's phone, and he makes a video pretending that he's being held hostage. It's clearly a fantasy that he's having, and Jerry never even knows that he made the video because Jerry is so technically inept. By the way, there's not one shred of pornography in this case, which is unheard of in a case like this, and maybe the most important fact in the entire case. And yet Jerry Sandusky is so technologically inept, he somehow got rid of all the pornography on his computers, even though you can't basically do that. They can always find it through forensics. But Jerry's so good at that, he didn't even realize Aaron Fisher made a video on his phone until his wife, many months later, took the phone to take a video of the family singing some songs and realized that Aaron made a video on that. Well, why is there no video evidence? Not even nothing like a, hey, what is Jerry doing to me, or please stop, or someone help, or whatever. Nothing. These kids all have cell phones.
How long ago was that happening? I mean, we're talking when cell phones weren't around. They didn't have them in their pocket. They probably would have had to hold a handheld camcorder.
You apparently don't know that Aaron Fisher's allegations are that he was being abused through 2008 by Jerry Sandusky. All right, and again, I just told you he had taken, basically stolen Jerry Sandusky's cell phone and made a video recording on it. There's nothing like that. There should be massive.
Or you would think that someone who fits this kind of profile would have other earmarkings of being an abuser, being a sexual deviant. There's nothing like that. No problems when he was at Penn State. Inconsistencies.
Jerry had a tremendous, this is important, Dino, I'm glad you mentioned it. Jerry had a tremendous relationship with his dad, which is usually the telltale sign. Jerry was never sexually abused himself, which is another telltale sign. Interestingly, Aaron Fisher, this is incredibly important. This part is interesting. I don't find it as relevant as some other people do. But Aaron Fisher's biological father is in prison as a sex offender. Aaron Fisher's stepfather, who, by the way, his mother writes about in their book that she had suspected he was abusing her children, including Aaron. That stepfather, subsequent to all of this, is also in prison, having pled guilty on 100 counts of child molestation, including molestation against his own child. This is Aaron Fisher's
father,
stepdad. Right. And by the way, before the stepdad ends up going to prison for child molestation, Jerry Sandusky tells Joe Amendola he believes that Aaron might have been sexually molested by the stepdad. Now, I don't know that happened. In fact, I actually have my doubts that theory is correct, but it's certainly more than plausible. But here's what I think really happened. Here's the real story of Aaron Fisher in a nutshell. Here's what really occurred. Aaron Fisher was a 15-year-old sex-crazed kid, and I know he was sex-crazed because I've talked to all of his ex-girlfriends, and I've talked to other. I talked to a kid he almost killed in a car accident while he was driving with Aaron Fisher in a car accident in 2010. Used to be his best buddy. He talked about how Aaron would masturbate in the bed next to him while sleepovers. He's a sex-crazed 15-year-old kid, and he's sick and tired of having to hang out with Jerry Sandusky, an old man who's giving him grief about his failing grades. He never thinks of Jerry as a football hero. This is an incredibly important fact. Aaron Fisher was 5 years old when Jerry Sandusky last coached a football game. Jerry Sandusky is not a football hero or celebrity to Aaron Fisher. He's an old guy who runs a charity who gives him grief about his grades that are falling at this point. His mother is a drunk. His mother is using Jerry Sandusky as a babysitter for her children that she can't afford. She wants to go out partying that night. Aaron Fisher is sick of hanging out with Jerry Sandusky. He's trying to get out of it. She's not letting him, and so he drops the "he makes me feel uncomfortable" card. After 3 years, he makes me uncomfortable. Long story short, and you can hear the interview I did with the neighbor of the Fishers who articulates having witnessed this directly and testified to this at trial, that he sees the formation of what is essentially the beginnings of this entire quote-unquote BS scandal. It is basically a 15-year-old kid trying to get out of going with an old guy when he wants to go and hang out with his friends. And his mother immediately realizes where this can go. Why? Because she's been involved in an incredibly similar case, which she's never told anybody about, which I found out on my own, was that she had helped her brother, Aaron's uncle, become known to police in another sex abuse case just a few years before called the Dr. Barry Bender case. And his mother, Aaron's mother, Dawn, has told people that she and her mother helped get her brother a settlement, a financial settlement in the Dr. Barry Bender case. So Dawn Fisher, Aaron Fisher's mother, sees immediately where this can go. She tells the neighbor, quote, "I'm going to own that MFer's house." She then makes numerous statements to other people about the money that is going to be involved here. This is in late 2008, early 2009. Aaron does the same thing. I've spoken to numerous of his friends, teammates, and even girlfriends he was having sex with, both during the investigation as well as even while the alleged abuse was occurring. They're positive that Aaron is lying. They're not even a little bit questioning
How
it.
How much money did Aaron parachute out of this thing with?
I don't have an exact number on that. The average settlement was about $3 million. He settled pretty quickly. My guess is it's in that range,
okay.
$4 million.
And then, of course, and I know that Brett has been taking inventory of everything, so I'm going to throw it over to him in a minute. And also, we want to get to the Costas interview. We got a sound cut that we're going to play. But there is the curious case, in this case, of Matt Sandusky.
Mm-hmm.
And a little bit of a flip-flop, don't you think? Some inconsistencies with this?
Well, I think you and I see eye to eye on this particular episode, because here's the story of Matt Sandusky. Matt Sandusky, at the age of 18, well after he now says he was abused by Jerry Sandusky, asks both Jerry and Dottie to adopt him, which they do. Okay, all right, whatever. Maybe he just thought it was best for him. Compliant victimization, okay, I guess I get that, although I certainly would never do that. I would never, after I was abused by somebody, want them to adopt me. But that's what ends up happening. When this whole thing starts to go down, Matt Sandusky is Jerry Sandusky's biggest supporter. He writes letters to the editor. In fact, Alan Meyer's letter to the editor references Matt Sandusky and saying, "Listen to Matt," is what Alan wrote in his particular letter to the editor, the so-called Mike McQueary victim number 2, who says nothing ever happened. Then Matt Sandusky testifies to the grand jury, makes unequivocally, under oath, the only time Matt Sandusky has ever talked about this case under oath, he said unequivocally that Jerry Sandusky never abused him and that he had grave doubts about the accusers against Jerry Sandusky. And he comes to the first day of the trial. He sits with Dottie Sandusky on day 1 of the trial. Suddenly, in the middle of the trial, he asks Dottie to babysit for his kids so that he can then go to police to tell him that he was a victim. This is after, and this is an important part I forgot to tell you. When Jerry Sandusky gets arrested, Matt Sandusky has to go to court, and does go to court, so that his kids, with his ex-wife, can see Jerry Sandusky. This is after the arrest. He fights in court so his kids can see the guy he now says abused him. That's absurd. It's ridiculous. It's overtly, transparently a lie that Matt Sandusky was abused. By the way, his version of abuse has changed dramatically from the time he told police to the time he talked to Oprah. The Oprah interview is a joke. You think the Bob Costas interview with Jerry was bad? I will bet anything, Dino, if you take a look at the final answer, or the most important answer that Matt Sandusky gave to Oprah, it makes Jerry Sandusky seem like Dino Costa when it comes to eloquence. He completely butchers. He basically throws up all over himself to Oprah. But because the news media didn't want to make a deal out of it, they ignored it. And because I frankly don't even think Oprah believed him. But what was Oprah going to do? I mean, she's an abuse victim herself. She wasn't going to call him out. But I think if you hooked Oprah up to a lie detector test, I'm pretty sure she would not be able to say she believes Matt Sandusky. His story has changed after the Oprah interview in a way that makes no damn sense at all. I mean, so I am, of all the things I am sure of in this case, I am most sure that Matt Sandusky has totally made up his story.
All right.
He got money and he got paid. He realized the ship was sinking after the first day of the trial. He got out just in time to save himself.
Has he received money?
Yes.
He's received about $3 million too.
somewhere in that range, even though his claim was outside of
one hell of a money train, man.
Now, when they came forward, did they have any idea that they were going to be getting any sort of, I mean, was there incentive to come out and be an alleged victim from the start, or the money came further down the road, correct?
Well, one of the many, that's an interesting misperception. Because, at trial, Aaron Fisher was asked that. And he said, oh, no. Oh, money? No. Well, that's just BS, because I've spoken to numerous people on the record, including his girlfriends, who say that's all he ever talked about. Years, back in early 2009, this was 3 years before there was a trial, that he was going to make money out of this, and that's why that Barry Bender case I referenced is so important, because his mother had experience in this. She knew the pathway, she had the roadmap, and that road was paved with gold, and Aaron knew it. Aaron was close to his uncle, so he probably knew the story too. So it is a lie that they didn't know they were going to get money.
One knew it. Did the other 7 knew it as well?
Well, it's interesting. The number 4 is the second most important witness of the arrest victims, because he's the only other one other than Aaron Fisher to claim sex. And this is another bombshell that the news media completely ignored, and this is a true bombshell. Victim number 4 was not saying anything about sex with Jerry Sandusky, and he was being interviewed by 2 investigators with his lawyer present. Now, why does he need a lawyer? Why does he need a civil lawyer to be questioned about whether or not he was abused by Jerry Sandusky? That doesn't make any sense right there, but here's the most important part. The investigators can't get him to say he was having sex with Jerry Sandusky, so they think they turned the recording off. And in fact, they actually turned the recording on. And so we have a recording which was played at trial where the lawyer for victim number 4 and the investigators conspire to lie to victim number 4, which they do in fact lie to him, saying that they have far more evidence than they actually have, that there's far more people claiming exactly what he's claiming than they were. In fact, there was no one claiming what he was claiming at that time. And that they then say, okay, let's go put the recorder back on. I don't know whether or not they realized at that point that they had actually been recording the whole thing, but they then go and lie to victim 4 just like they said they were going to, and lo and behold, after victim 4 is convinced that there are all these other people, which there weren't, saying things about Jerry Sandusky and having sex, voila, victim number 4 with his civil lawyer right there ends up with an allegation which ended up making him millions of dollars. And he was he was the second of only 2 who were claiming a sex act at the time of Joe Paterno's firing, which is the moment that the avalanche occurs. And after that point, if you come forward after that point, and by the way, the 2 trial victims who did come forward after that point are hilariously lacking in credibility.
Okay, so it was a feeding frenzy after that point. Now, before we get to Costas, and I posed this question to Brett. Brett, it really is. We would have to spend days on this. Really, maybe it would be more fair for me to ask you this question after we spoke with John and we were able to go through just a plethora of information. John has more information on this, whether you agree or disagree with him. And I'm talking to our audience right now. John, there's nobody on planet Earth who knows more about this case with Sandusky and Paterno and all the elements included than John does. And this could be good because then you and John will be able to go, back and forth. Has he said anything? Has he given you reason to pause and consider through what he has said? Have you found anything, Brett, compelling to the point where you say, I want to look into this a little bit further myself? Or are you as convinced right now, or as you were at the start of this conversation, that Sandusky is the monster that he's been painted out to be?
I'm convinced, as I was at the beginning of our conversation, that he is the monster that he was portrayed to be. Yes, that's where I still stand.
Based on what?
I mean, based on eight different victims coming forward.
Let me ask you this: which accuser do you? Let me ask you this: since you're so convinced he's the monster.
Well, he was found guilty as well, so I mean, I don't need to be put on trial here.
OJ was found not guilty, so that means nothing.
Okay, go ahead.
These circumstances, but tell me this: explain to me which of the accusers you believe most. Well, tell me which accuser you believe most.
John, here's the deal. I mean, you're talking to some.
Which accuser you believe most?
Yeah, I mean, I believe the guy in the shower the most probably, but that's a hard question. Hold on, John. John, hold on.
Nothing happened.
John, hold on. That's a hard question for me to answer because I found out you were coming on the program about 5 minutes before we got a hold of you. You've been doing nothing but researching this for the last 2-3 years. Well, this has been out of my head for the last 2-3 years.
Then you should have doubt then. Then you should have at least have doubt. I mean, you said when I asked you the question, which accuser you believed, you picked the one that's on record saying nothing ever happened and never testified. That's pretty extraordinary.
John,
so that's what you're going to put everything on a guy who never testified and said nothing happened, and you're positive of it. Wow.
John, how many victims recant their stories, say something happened, and then for fear of retribution, something happening down the road, end up recanting those statements? Those are things that happen to victims all the time. And I want to get to something that you said at the...
They get paid $3 million. You're right.
I want to get to something you said at the very beginning of this as well, and something that you mentioned again, that at the age of 64, he was such a savant that he had been doing this for 20 years, and then all of a sudden, the first one, I can't remember his name, ended up coming forward. He was such a savant to pick the right guys to be able to do that, and yes, I think he was a savant at being a monster, and you mentioned that in your 3.5...
Because he did this with no evidence.
Hold on.
Extraordinary.
Hold on.
No evidence. He was a savant.
Hold on.
No pornography either.
You said that in your 3.5-hour interview with him, he is such... If he is such a monster and the monster that everyone's portraying him to be, he would have been exposed as a monster, in your opinion, in that 3.5-hour discussion that you had. And I don't think that's even remotely a fair statement, because that's what makes monsters so good at being monsters, is you cannot tell that they are monsters. No one thought Aaron Hernandez was a murderer.
Okay. Well, yeah, we ended up having a lot of evidence that indicated that he was. By the way, at least in the Aaron Hernandez case, we have a dead body. We don't even know that any crime took place.
No, I'm talking Aaron Hernandez had already killed 3 people and got a contract from Bob Kraft, who sat down and said, having this conversation with him, I would have never guessed he's a monster. That's what makes monsters good at being monsters, is you can't tell they're monsters.
Well, there's several things that you're forgetting. Number one, I acknowledge that. I said that's what got me suspicious. It's not what made me conclude it. That's why I investigated it for the next 2.5 years. Number two, you're forgetting he was already convicted at that point. He wasn't someone who had never been accused and was on his couch having a martini and relaxed watching television. He was in a prison in handcuffs after having gone through solitary confinement and the worst couple of years anyone could ever imagine of their lives, and someone who believed for sure that he was guilty. So, I mean, you are comparing apples and oranges here, and it's important to point out that is only the beginning of my suspicions. It's not the reason why I am the least naive person on the planet. Of course it's possible for someone to know somebody else when they have a huge incentive to do so. I just think you should take into context the circumstances of that interview and the fact that I spent a ridiculous amount of time trying to basically disprove my gut reaction, and I haven't been able to do it. In fact, I'm positive.
Brett, he did say something interesting when he asked you which victim you believe the most, and you said victim number one. And if we're going to go by testimony and what's been written to newspapers and stuff like that, victim number one, who's Alan Myers, said that victim number two is Alan Myers, said that nothing happened.
Right. Thank you.
He said something happened at first and then recanted that statement later.
No, he never said anything. There's never been a statement made public.
See, and I want to say something before you answer, John. I'll have you know, Brett, I had assumed a lot. When I went into a lot of conversations with John, I had assumed a lot, only to be corrected by John's factual information that he told me, where I had then to acknowledge and concede, well, you know what? I didn't have that right. It was wrong. I then went back, looked at it, and I confirmed what John had told me. So, anyway, go ahead.
Well, no, but as far as Alan Myers is concerned, it's really important to point out that up until the time he gets a lawyer and who got him $3 million, way after all of this goes down. In fact, technically, he wasn't announced as a accuser until after the trial is over. That doesn't happen. There's no statement made by him indicating other than nothing ever happened. And just think about it logically. Had he been abused in the shower, he would have wanted justice for that if he had really changed the story, and he would have insisted on testifying, but he didn't, because he knew it wasn't true, and he didn't want to take part in putting his friend Jerry behind bars. The deal with Shubin was this: keep your mouth shut, I'm going to get you millions of dollars, you're not going to have the blood on your hands, other people are going to put Jerry behind bars because he's a pedophile. And Alan said, okay. That's what happened. It's obvious to anybody with a brain.
Yeah, well, I mean, I also think that victims can be scared of their, abusers and not want.
Who was going to be scared of Jerry Sandusky after Joe Paterno was fired and after the Costas interview? Nobody. Nobody was scared of Jerry Sandusky.
All right. Well, you brought up the Costas interview. Let me play this. We'll play this brief soundbite for you that raised a lot of eyes, and tell me your response to when Bob Costas asked him this question.
Are you a pedophile?
No.
Are you sexually attracted to young boys, to underage boys?
Am I sexually attracted to underage boys? Sexually attracted? No, I enjoy young people. I love to be around them. But no, I'm not sexually attracted to young boys.
Is it fair to say, before you give a response to that answer that Sandusky gave to Costas during that interview, is it fair to say that you believe that the majority of the people who view this case, view Sandusky, have a very limited understanding, only a surface-oriented comprehension of the details and so on and so forth, that Brett, my on-air host here, as well as millions of other people, have drawn their conclusions simply from what the media narrative has been? It's got to be he's guilty, no matter what is said by someone like you, John, or any other person who may want to do some critical thinking on this, that the media narrative has certainly infected and poisoned the minds of people to believe without question, no matter what, that Jerry Sandusky's a monster.
Absolutely correct. And this clip that you just played an enormous role in that. I think that the firing of Joe Paterno was the first thing. That was the most important thing. But then that clip from the Costas interview, that was a 1-2 punch that ended any chance that Jerry Sandusky had of getting a fair trial. And, I know I'm a contrarian, but I've told you this before, Dino. That statement was the first time I thought he might actually be innocent. That thought actually crossed my mind, because my thought is, wait a minute, how in the world could you answer that question that poorly if you were really a serial pedophile? You'd have that one down. You would have that one.
Well, what do you mean? What do you mean by that? What do you mean by that?
Well, let's pretend that the allegations are true, and you've been a serial pedophile for decades, right? And you get asked, are you sexually attracted to young boys? And you go, am I sexually attracted to young boys? I'm attracted to them, but not sexually. I mean, that's not the answer of a serial pedophile, criminal mastermind. That's the most absurd answer you could possibly give, unless you're a naive naif who never even comprehended the notion.
Which he is.
Sexually attracted.
Which you consider Sandusky to be a naive naif.
Right, which is exactly what. Here's what happened with that answer. And I have an interview with Dottie Sandusky in our preparation for the Today Show, where I have Dottie laughing about that particular response in a way that I can verify is based in fact, because it frustrates the hell out of her that every question she asks Jerry, he repeats the question and thinks about it. If you ask him what time it is, if he doesn't have 3 watches on, he won't give you the answer right away. He thinks about it. That's his mannerism. It annoys the crap out of Dottie, and I've had the exact same experience. If you look at my interview with him, he does it several times in the interview. And in that particular case, it was obviously not the answer that you would give if you knew you were guilty and you were ready for that question. You would, of course, anybody would go, what the hell are you talking about? I'm not sexually attracted to the young boy.
Well, John, I'm amazed at how you're able to get into his head and what, a sexual predator would have said, what Mike McCreary should have done in that instance, what the victim should have done that was allegedly being raped, what his son should have said. I'm just amazed that you're able to get into their heads and know what they should have done in that moment. How are you capable of doing that?
You're right, because I understand totally what you're saying. We are supposed to leave common sense and basic logic at the door in this case. I realize that much like the global warming debate, that we're not supposed to use our own ability to analyze. We're not supposed to use common sense. We're not supposed to use logic. We're supposed to just simply go along with the pack, what the experts who all have a huge self-interest in a particular outcome want us to believe, even when common sense, logic, and the facts completely contradict that. So I cop to what you're saying.
Well, hold on a second. I just want to interject this. Could he not say the same thing to you, that you're taking the side of the other people and you're apologizing for them in ways that they were spinning or blocking things out, or you're taking the same exact tact, are you not? But for the other side.
No, I'm just believing what the accusers are saying.
And John is believing that the other guy's innocent.
Yeah, but he's jumping into their head and telling me, well, here's what.
But you've jumped into a few other people's heads on the other side, and you said, well, it's been well known that people can lavish praise on people that are hurting them.
Right, and those are facts. That happens. People do that.
But there's no evidence. See, that's, I guess, the most important part here is there's no evidence where there should be tons. There should be tons of evidence. If there was other evidence, guys, or any actual evidence, I wouldn't even be bothering with this. As I tell everybody who is on the other side of this, please convince me. I want to be done with this. You think this has been a pleasure ride? Dino, you know how much this has torn me up. It has been horrible for me personally, my career, my marriage, my golf game. I don't make a dime from this. By the way, even if it gets fixed, I'm not going to get any credit for it. I'll get zero credit for it. If it ever gets fixed, some big name's going to swoop in and pretend that they fixed the whole thing or they cracked the case. There is no scenario where this is good for me. I would be thrilled. I would literally, I would pay you, Dino, $100 to convince me that Jerry Sandusky was guilty so that I could be done with this. And by the way, I'd offer that to anybody who can convince me of it. You can't. And by the way, I don't even like Jerry. He drives me crazy. I can't stand it when I get a letter from him in the mail because I go, oh, no, not again. I mean, it's not as if I have any dog in this hunt.
So you're saying, Brett, that he's guilty based upon your own, is it fair to say, instinct tells you he's guilty?
Yeah, instinct tells me he's guilty, and I believe that the 8 people that came forward, I don't think that they came forward for money. I think that they came forward because I mean, all their stories were very similar in terms of how he groomed them. Weren't they pretty similar in terms of the grooming and how he went about,
Okay, that's not easily duplicatable. I mean, I'll even grant you that for the sake of argument.
Okay.
But their actual stories are very different. I mean, I can go through the list of 1 through 8 if you want, but I mean, that's a myth. That is a myth that somehow, they were all the same stories.
Okay, well, if we were talking 1 victim or 2 victims, then yeah, when you start...
Brett,
go ahead.
Don't you understand? Hold on a second.
Sure.
The idea that somehow the numbers prove anything is a fallacy. The numbers prove nothing in a case where everybody got paid millions of dollars. Everybody. And they knew they were going to get paid millions of dollars, I believe, before Paterno's firing. But after Paterno's firing, everybody knew. Everybody knew. And I think it's incredibly important that the key to this whole case is when victim 4 is convinced that Aaron Fisher, although he doesn't know his name at that time, that Aaron Fisher is telling the truth. By the way, there's even a scene in Aaron Fisher's book where it's clear that victim 4 outside of the trial is basically testing Aaron out to make sure that he's not lying, because victim 4 wants to make sure that if he goes through with this, it's not based upon a bull crap story, because he knows his own story is bull crap, but he doesn't want to be the only guy to put Jerry behind bars, but he's willing to go along for the ride if other people are doing it. That's how this happened. It's so incredibly easy. It's amazing to me that more people don't understand it. But once you believe Jerry is a pedophile, it's incredibly easy to buy everything. When the news media is telling you this happened, Penn State is telling you this happened, the firing of Joe Paterno makes it clear it had to have happened because Penn State couldn't be this colossally stupid. It's remarkable to me.
How did they feel?
What I see is something is incredibly easy to understand. Other people just don't want to see.
How did they feel, the jury, for this? Just out of curiosity, body of people that could legitimately be impartial and never have heard anything about this. Were they able to find 12 people? They weren't at all?
Well, here's a great story. I got a great story of Jerry Sandusky, the criminal mastermind, for you, folks. This is Jerry Sandusky, the criminal mastermind. One of the jurors, a woman, told the prosecution and defense during voir dire, during the jury selection process, that she wasn't sure she could be objective because her family is so close to Mike McQueary and has so much affection for Mike McQueary that she wouldn't feel comfortable questioning his credibility. I spoke to this woman, by the way, after the trial. She used that exact phrase. She said to me she didn't feel comfortable questioning Mike McQueary's credibility. And, of course, Joe Amendola, the defense attorney, said, well, Jerry, we got to get rid of this woman. She's already admitted she can't question McQueary's credibility. And Jerry Sandusky told Amendola, keep her on the jury because she knew about Penn State football, and he thought that she would be fair to him because of the Penn State football angle. I mean, that's how this insanity happened. I mean, not only was this woman allowed on the jury, which was ridiculous, but she was allowed on the jury because Jerry Sandusky insisted that she was. The trial had no business being held in Center County as it was. There was way too much prejudicial publicity, not just prejudicial publicity, but the entire community had a huge incentive to convict him. They had already been accused of enabling a pedophile to protect football once. They weren't going to ever declare him not guilty. The community would have been destroyed a second time. So this was the Salem witch trial, guys. And it's not even close. It's just not even close to anybody who looks at this with an open mind.
Has anything happened in the last little bit that has emboldened your feeling that Sandusky's innocent?
Yes. Last week, first of all, I put out my expose on Aaron Fisher, which I urge people to take a look at framingpaterno.com. But last week, the defense put out their petition, and this is extraordinary, Dino. And I don't know if you're aware of this. This is amazing. I mean, there's so many amazing things about this case, but this is remarkable. The so-called janitor episode, which Louis Freeh made a huge deal about in the Freeh Report, as evidence of the horrendous Penn State football culture, that somehow that there were janitors that had seen Sandusky molesting a boy and had said nothing about it for 10 years because they were afraid of Joe Paterno or somehow Penn State's even though Paterno was not their supervisor, but they were somehow afraid of the Penn State football culture, and that's why they didn't come forward. Those are the words of Louis Freeh at his press conference that was held an hour after a 267-page report was put online that no one ever read before they asked him any questions, and he's never answered any questions since. Well, guess what? The so-called janitor who witnessed this did not testify at trial. We were told he did not testify at trial. By the way, there was also no victim, which is awfully odd, considering there were $3 million at least at stake for the victim in a highly publicized case. So no victim comes forward. And the only direct witness of this alleged event is a guy by the name of James Calhoun. Well, James Calhoun does not testify at trial because we are told he has dementia. And that because he has dementia, his testimony is no longer worthwhile. And instead, they allow a hearsay witness, someone who alleges that 10 years prior, Calhoun had told them about this episode. And based upon this, Jerry Sandusky gets convicted of 5 major counts without a date, without a victim, without a contemporaneous report, and without a direct witness testifying. Well, that was bad enough. This week, we now found out publicly, although I've known this for quite a while, that there was an interview done by the prosecution of Mr. James Calhoun, the janitor in question, and Mr. Calhoun was asked the question on tape, was Jerry Sandusky the person you saw that night? He says not once, not twice, but 3 times, unequivocally, no. No. And Jerry Sandusky was convicted of 5 of 45 counts, based upon an episode where the direct witness was under prosecution interview saying, no, Jerry was not the guy I saw. He never testified. Again, there was no date. Can you imagine, folks, being accused of something in which there's no date, no victim, no direct witness, no contemporaneous report? The only thing we know about this is that 10 years after the fact, a hearsay witness comes forward and says, oh, yeah, I remember something about that, and here's what this guy who allegedly has dementia but contradicts my whole story allegedly told me 10 years before. it's unbelievable. I mean, it's unbelievable. In fact, on appeal, the judge basically admitted that, you know what, I might have erred there, but it doesn't really matter because the jury still would have believed all the other victims and the punishment still would have been the same. Well, it does matter because all of this, as as Brett has already indicated, it's cumulative, right? You're believing all of them because of the cumulative effect.
No, that's not true. That's not why I'm believing them, but it plays a big role into me believing that that each of them is telling the truth.
Well, they're not. I mean, there's no evidence that there are. They are. There's no logic that there are.
How much does evidence play a role in this to you, Brett?
Me?
Brett.
What's that?
Evidence, direct evidence, of which John does a great job, whether you believe him or not. He does a great job of exploiting the fact that there is very little substantive evidence that connects a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, again,
and it makes me think, man. I'm with you. I thought Sandusky was an absolute monster. I'm at the point right now where I vacillate back and forth. John has made, listen, this is your first time on the air with him. I've talked with him many times before, and I have to admit that he makes a compelling case to think about this on another level.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the direct evidence itself, yeah, sure. Do I wish there was more? Absolutely, of course I do. But I go to what McQuarrie said, to what each of these victims has said, and I believe what they have to say. And again, I don't know if they knew there was a pot of gold at the end for saying this, that they were going to get millions of dollars. And I think being put through the fire of being on trial and being someone who claims to have been sexually assaulted, I don't know if that's...
There was no fire. They were not put through a fire. They were protected. You don't even know any of their names, for God's sake. They got paid millions of dollars without their names even being known. Most of their friends don't even know that they were accusers in this case, other than Aaron Fisher, who wrote a book and made lots of money from that, too. I mean, there was no fire. The proof of that, by the way, is I finally put the Fishers under some fire, and they completely melted down. You can see my interactions with them at FramingPaterno.com. Had there been a fire, they would have melted, but the fire was all on the other side because of the media coverage and because of the Paterno firing. This was the worst example of a trial, even worse than O.J. Simpson. I believe this was the inverse of O.J. in every possible way. Just think of O.J. Simpson and put everything else upside down, and you got Jerry Sandusky.
Do you believe that Joe Paterno covered this up?
Do I?
Yes.
Yeah, I believe that as well. Yeah, I do. I believe that. So, yeah.
Do you believe in aliens? Do you believe?
No, I don't believe in
Santa Claus.
Don't believe in aliens. I've never been a big.
Why don't you believe in Santa Claus? Why don't you believe in Santa?
Do not.
Because 98% of 5-year-olds believe in Santa Claus. So, why would you?
Okay, good way to end that there, John. Yeah, go with that.
You're believing things that are nonsensical, for which there's no evidence. I mean, it's like you believe in a religion.
John, you're in the overwhelming distinct majority. Don't talk to me like all of a sudden I'm just some guy out there believing some crazy stuff here.
No, you're right. That's why I'm using the Santa Claus analogy. There have been polls that indicate 98% of 5-year-olds believe in Santa Claus. Guess who's right? The 2% that don't.
All right.
I'm in the 2% that don't.
Well, let me ask. We haven't asked Dino. Dino said he's vacillating back and forth. Dino, is Jerry Sandusky guilty of raping and molesting young boys?
I don't know.
Thank you, Dino.
I don't know.
I appreciate your
I can't say yes, and I can't say no because of a lot of information that I've been taken in over the last several months, and
that's a fair answer. And I don't know for 1,000% sure. Of course, no one knows but Jerry Sandusky and those boys. Those are the only people that truly know. And for Dino to say he doesn't know, again, John, you can't say for certain that you know that he didn't do it either. I mean, no one can really say that.
I don't believe where John has affected me, and again, doing my own due diligence off the microphone with John. I don't believe that Paterno was involved in covering it up.
Thank you, Dino. That means a lot. I appreciate it. That makes all the time I've spent with you on this worthwhile.
But the Sandusky thing, I don't know. At one time I was convinced as brazenly as you are, Brett. But I've done a lot of thinking on this. There's a lot of inconsistencies, a lot of things that don't make sense. And all the things that you said about, what people can do in protecting, monsters and sexual deviants and all that. I've taken all that into consideration. I've thought about everything on both sides of the equation, and I'm at the point right now I've gone from absolutely being 1,000% convinced that Sandusky was a sexual deviant, a pervert, and a monster, and a child molester, to now the pendulum has come back to the center, and I don't know which way to go right now. I haven't made up my mind definitively.
And that's why there ought to be a new trial, which is what the Sandusky defense team has asked for. I doubt that anyone will have the balls in Pennsylvania to do that. But if there was a new trial under fair circumstances, I would vet any of my extremities and a huge portion of my bank account that Jerry Sandusky would be found not guilty. And it would not be because of reasonable doubt. It would be because he's simply innocent. I realize it's hard for people to understand it, but when you look at the facts, it's actually the only logical scenario that you can come to based upon all the known evidence.
John, can't thank you enough again. Thanks for being with us over the last 2 hours. Continued success with framingpaterno.com. Continue to fight the good fight for the causes that you're fighting them. Any new information comes down the pike, I know you're going to tip me off, and we'll do this again maybe in a few weeks or months down the road. Who knows where the twists and turns that this thing might take? It's been utterly fascinating at the very least. So,
Dino, you're the man. I really appreciate the time, and Brett, nice talking to you.
John, do appreciate the time. Thank you.
All right, it's John Ziegler, framingpaterno.com, talk show host, political and sports pundit, documentary filmmaker, and all-around hardworking guy. Did you have fun today, at least?
Yeah. I'm glad we did that. I am. I'm glad we did that. No doubt about it.
It was stimulating. It's stimulating radio, and makes you think a little bit at the very least. So you want to know more, go to framingpaterno.com. John is very accessible. We'll return your emails, questions. It might even give you a call if you leave your phone number.